Let us pray. Lord Jesus, you are the risen one. You conquered our sin and death. You alone have all power and authority. It is to you that we give all honor and praise. Lord Jesus, we look at our community and we see both good and evil at work. May your good triumph over evil through your mercy, grace, and justice. We know, Lord, that when we love you, serve you, and obey you, we align ourselves with your perfect will. And there is nothing better in this life than to enjoy your will and purpose for our lives. God, give us the desire to follow you fearlessly and passionately as we lead our community through the abilities, the gifts, and resources that you have blessed us with. Give us your wisdom and understanding to make decisions for the Prescott community that encourages the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Lord, it is both an honor to serve you and a great responsibility. We know that we as leaders are called to a higher calling. You alone are the one that we are all accountable to. We will all stand before your throne on that day. May we hear you speak these words: "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor. Roll call, please.
Mayor Kirkendall?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kukniel?
Here.
Councilman Arnold?
Here.
Councilman Blair will be attending telephonically in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Councilman Lamerson?
Here.
Councilman Lozelle?
Here.
Councilwoman Wilcox?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay. Any announcements, Manager?
No, sir.
We have 4 proclamations today.
The first one is proclaiming April 12th through the 18th as National Telecommunications Week, and Chief Deputy Reinhardt and I believe others are here in attendance to accept the proclamation.
The weapons on that side.
Chris, you want us up there with you?
I feel safe, you know. This is a proclamation for National Telecommunications Week, April 12th through the 18th, 2015. Whereas the professional public safety communication specialist plays a vital role and crucial role in the protection of life and property, preservation of public order, and assurance to every man, woman, and child, helping to save countless lives by responding to emergency calls, dispatching emergency professionals and equipment, and providing moral support to citizens in distress in the city and the state. And whereas the state of Arizona, city of Prescott, is fortunate to have dedicated communication specialists who work in the police and fire communication centers to provide and dispatch emergency response capabilities for police, fire, and emergency medical services. And whereas the public safety communication specialist is, in many situations, the first and only contact that a citizen or emergency personnel may have with a public safety agency. Now, therefore, the Mayor and City Council of Prescott, in order to acknowledge the dedicated professional communication specialists throughout the city, do hereby recognize the week of April 12th through the 18th, 2015 as National Telecommunications Week.
Yeah, most folks don't get to see these folks behind the scenes. Sometimes we only get to see them from a click on the radio or a conversation as we respond. These are the heart and soul that goes into emergency response. They're the first line of defense. And through their ability to multitask, they serve not only the city of Prescott, but other communities throughout the Prescott Basin as well. And for them, we're honored to accept it on behalf of the telecommunications.
Thank you, guys.
Item B, proclaiming April 2015 as Parkinson Disease Awareness Month. And Judy Talley, I believe, is here to accept the proclamation.
This is a proclamation for Parkinson's Disease Awareness Month.
April 2015. Whereas Parkinson's disease is a progressive disorder of the central nervous system affecting more than 1.5 million people in the United States. My aunt was one of those. Whereas the American Parkinson's Disease Association Incorporated, founded in 1961, has sought to ease the burden and find the cure for this disease through research, patient and family services, education, and sponsorship of 62 chapters, 58 information and referral centers, and more than 1,000 support groups throughout the United States. And whereas the world, the nation, and the city of Prescott observed Parkinson's Disease Awareness Month in April 2015, and whereas the city of Prescott recognizes the efforts of the Arizona chapter to raise funds and promote awareness to fight Parkinson's disease, thereby improving the quality of life for those living with the disease. Now, therefore, I, Merlin D. Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, Arizona, in recognition and in honor of those who work with the American Parkinson's Disease Association Incorporated and their value to the residents of Prescott, Arizona, do hereby proclaim April 2015 Parkinson's Disease Awareness Month.
Yes, I want to take this opportunity. Thank you. I'm honored. And as the program director for the APDA in Arizona, I'm also pleased to tell you that here in the Quad Cities area in Prescott, we have the largest Parkinson's support group in the state. And it is open. There's information on the internet, and I'd be happy to give information, but it is open to anyone who's interested in learning more about Parkinson's, the care, and receiving the support for living with the disease or being a care partner to someone who has the disease. So thank you very much.
Item C, proclaiming April 2015 as Fair Housing Month. And Jerry Jones, the chairman of the CDBG committee, and Michael Sardi are in attendance.
Where's your tie?
This is what happens when you get a retired banker and an active banker. No ties. Fair Housing Month, April 2015. Whereas the Civil Rights Act of 1968, the Fair Housing Act, and the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988 ensure full and fair access to housing opportunities, and whereas April 2015 marks the 47th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Act, and whereas shelter is a basic human need, and when shelter is denied, the quality of human life is greatly diminished, and whereas people must not be denied equal access to and enjoyment of housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, I guess that would be sexuality, disability, and familial status, and whereas the city of Prescott recognizes the values, the efforts of those who seek to reduce barriers to full and fair housing opportunity, and whereas April is designated nationally as Fair Housing Month, now therefore Marlon Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, does hereby proclaim Fair Housing Month in the City of Prescott. In witness whereto or thereof, he has set his hand and caused the seal of the City of Prescott to be affixed the 7th day of April 2015. Jerry, Mike, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the work you do on our CBDG group. Do you have any comments?
We appreciate the opportunity to be of service to you, the council, and the mayor, and to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item D, proclaiming April 2015 as Water Awareness Month. And Leslie Grazer and Anarchy Chamberlain are here to accept.
Amanda and Leslie, are you coming up too? And the other Leslie. Wow. I'm in good company. You know, I do hug trees, it's true. Okay. This is a proclamation for Water Awareness Month. Whereas water is one of our most vital and precious resources, and whereas Arizona is a semi-arid state where water is scarce and population continues to increase our demand for water. And whereas all citizens of the city of Prescott and visitors should strive to use water efficiently, as practicing a low water use lifestyle is a way that each individual and business can help ensure a long-term sufficient water supply. And whereas water education is a cornerstone to any comprehensive water conservation program, and greater awareness of water issues can be gained through community education, action, and celebration. And whereas water smart landscaping is an opportunity to enhance the native beauty of our community while promoting a community engagement and sharing. And whereas the City of Prescott offers residents rebates through water conservation incentive program to encourage water conservation inside and out this month and every month of the year. And whereas the City of Prescott is committed to delivering high quality water and managing its water resources to meet the needs of its current and future customers. Now therefore, I, Marlon D. Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, do hereby proclaim April as Water Awareness Month. Would like to accept and speak. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for proclaiming April Water Awareness Month, and thank our community partners that also promote water awareness in the community, not just in April, but year-round, and give people a chance to talk about some upcoming events this month. I'm going to put in a quick plug for the regional Prescott Regional SciTech Fest. It takes place Saturday, April 18th, 9 to 5 at the Gateway Mall. It's going to be featuring a lot of hands-on science activities, exhibits, demonstrations, other cool activities. I hear there's going to be a helicopter there. So good to bring the kids out. We'll have some water conservation stuff happening there.
I'm Amanda Richardson, representing the City of Prescott Watershed Smart Program, which seeks to engage citizens and businesses in helping to prevent polluted runoff and protecting the quality of water in our local waterways.
Hi, I'm Chris Hoy, the president of CWAG. CWAG is Citizens Water Advocacy Group. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We have a board of directors and 3 standing committees: public policy, science, and education. Dr. Pete Krupnik is the chair of our science committee. Jerry Strickland back there, retired city manager from Chino Valley, is the chair of our public policy committee, and I'm the temporary chair of the education committee. Let me just tell you about a couple of upcoming events. We have 158 dues-paying members, by the way, bigger than the city council, and we have 709 people that subscribe to our email publications, which is a water calendar and a news and views newsletter. We have public meetings once a month. Last month, Greg Cornrum from Salt River Project was our speaker, talking about the project. Prescott Valley, and SRP are involved in to study the potential impact of the BC pipeline on the Verde River. This month, this Saturday, 10 to noon at the GPUU Church, 2 blocks behind True Value, Tom Bushatsky, the newly appointed director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, will be our speaker, and he'll be talking about desalination. And then in May, Guy Carpenter from Corolla Engineering will be our speaker, talking about direct potable reuse. So please come and see those meetings, and thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, sir. I'm Michael Bird. I'm the executive director for Prescott Creeks Preservation Association. We've been a community nonprofit for 25 years now, working to achieve healthy watersheds and clean waters in central Arizona. One of the things I think that we're well known for is the Granite Creek Cleanup, which is coming up also on Saturday the 18th. So next year we'll have to coordinate a little bit better, but we hope to be there with some of our things next year. The Granite Creek Cleanup takes place, starts at Granite Creek Park, and it goes from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. Or I'm sorry, 11 a.m. 2 hours in the morning. It'll be a long cleanup. There's no shortage of trash and debris in the creeks to clean up, though. Our organization has been running the event since 2007. We've gotten 40 tons worth of stuff out of the creeks. That's a lot. We thought we were going to work ourselves out of a job. That has yet to happen. About 16% of what we've picked up out of the creeks we've tried to recycle or upcycle, repurpose those into art or other materials that can be used. And we've had about 35 100 participants from the community and visitors here to Prescott. And each year we've been averaging about 500, a little over 500. That represents almost $12,000 worth of volunteer labor that we get in 2 hours. So we're tremendously excited about that. The city's been a great partner. We've worked with Rich Tyree, Catherine Moody, Michelle Stacy Schroeder over at Parks, and then we've got 20 or more sponsors for the event. So we hope everyone could come out and join us. If you want to find out more or pre-register, you can go to the Prescott Creeks website at prescottcreeks.org. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Mara Kack. I'm the Education Director at the Highland Center for Natural History, and we are very excited to be supporting Water Awareness Month and being a partner with the City of Prescott. One of the main ways that we are able to support it as a nonprofit outdoor and science education center is through our native plant sale, which is the first month of May. And through this sale, we are able to promote the use of natives and landscaping to bring back native habitats for our local wildlife, and then also use Xeriscapes landscaping to reduce the amount of water and still have a wonderful space for yourself. Throughout the rest of the year, the Highland Center has educational opportunities for children and adults alike that generate awareness of science, things like water consciousness, and also how to be wise caretakers of our local environment for generations to come.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now we'll go to our presentations.
A presentation of Prescott Water Smart Landscaping and Well-Based Interface for Outdoor Water Conservation.
All right. So I didn't introduce myself. Aniki Chamberlain, Water Resource Coordinator for the City of Prescott. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of Water Smart Landscaping. It's a website we recently upgraded, and we're going to continue to develop it over time. This website is going to serve as our primary outreach tool for outdoor water conservation and to promote water smart landscaping in the Prescott community. So we will just get started. So first, the web page, www.prescottwatersmart.com. This will take you to the announcements screen. And here we're going to house different information, upcoming events, current restrictions, links to other resources in the community. So this will be live, so definitely check in and see what's going on in the water smart world. So basically, to get started, you're going to go to Gardens. And if you select Tours, this is where outstanding water efficient gardens are displayed with multiple pictures. So here's an example. We'll go to the Bowman Garden. This is Pam Bowman. She's a master gardener in town. It was really nice to donate some photos. So a couple of things on here. You'll see a social media bar. And so this is for users to basically post plants or garden images to Facebook or Twitter and other social network. Not big of a social network, but I'm sure some of you know what some of these are. And you'll also notice on here some hot links. So these little squares over plants. It'll highlight what the plant is, give you some information about it. So I got a little blurb here, but if I want to know more information, I'll click on it. And it's going to take me to a page where it shows me the plant, and then there's a lot of different information. So in particular, if I like this plant, I can select this add button, and it's going to put it on a list. So it confirms that the plant's on the list, and we'll look at that here in a second. So in addition to the tours, and there's a bunch of them, so I encourage you to go through. There's 5 pages of them, local landscapes. You can also go to galleries, which basically is local images sorted by categories, so homeowners can more efficiently find solutions to their landscaping needs. So front yards, backyards, lawn alternative, 4 pages of them. I encourage you to go through it. We'll just select backyards here. So you can see there's 51 different examples of backyards. So you also notice these green boxes here. So those are hot links to highlight landscaping that uses permeable surfaces or reduces runoff, because we're not just promoting water conservation. Worked with Amanda, we're promoting watershed health as well. So can definitely solve some of those issues through landscaping. So you can click on this, it'll take you to a fact sheet either on permeable surfaces or solving runoff problems. So good resources there. And also when you're in these galleries, say I like a particular photo, not just the plants in it, I can select add, goes to my list. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, your list. So I select my list, and any of the plants I had, it will record them, so you can select as many as you want, or gardens. And that'll select the residents. So it's a really great tool to kind of organize your thoughts, get some landscape ideas together. And then also some other resources when you're ready. They got a lot of great tips on getting started, landscape design, irrigation maintenance, and also a watering guide for just some basic Prescott watering information. So we're really excited about this. Like I said, we're going to continue to develop it over time. We're definitely looking to the community for photos of their gardens, before and after pictures, ideas on what they want to see, what information would be helpful. So we're really excited about it. It's going to be a good tool moving forward. And that's all that I have. If there's any questions, comments, short stories?
Are all your photos local? The gardens local?
You had to ask that. No, most of them are. When it was originally developed, there were some photos. We didn't quite have the set of photos we needed, so there's some from similar climates. And that was our big push this year, to try to get a lot of photos from the community to kind of phase out some of the ones from different areas and start bringing in the local pictures. So we got a bunch, a lot of participation from master gardeners, local landscapers. So over time, we're really trying to get photos and tailor it specifically to the Prescott community. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to item B, Mr. Blair is with us right now, so can you hear us, Councilman Blair?
Indeed, I can.
Okay. Item B, introduction of new businesses, Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon, Neil.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Neil, and I am the Membership Director for the Prescott Chamber of Commerce. This next Thursday, April 16th, the Chamber's hosting another mixer at Bucky's Casino up at the Eagle's Nest Lounge at the Prescott Resort from 5 to 6:30. Also, we're having a membership drive at our downtown office from 3 to 5, and that's tomorrow. Everyone's invited to stop by. KQ&A is going to be broadcasting live, and we're going to have some cookies and giveaways. So if you're hungry, come on out. The Prescott Chamber continues to expand our membership. Here's a list of our newest members: 100 Club of Arizona, Afterburn Technologies, College and Career Decisions, Cornerstone Family Chiropractic, Farmers Insurance, Rex Townsend Agency, Finders Keepers Dating Service, Galloping Goose, the Iron Springs Design, Prescott Arizona Kennel Club, Prescott Firefighter Charities, Prescott Lobster and Seafood Company, Stoats Equipment, John Deere, and finally, the Wild Iris Coffee Shop. Thank you.
You had a good month.
Yes, sir. Continue to grow.
Keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move into the discussion items.
Item 1A, discussion of the Watson Lake Total Maximum Daily Load TMDL issued by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and possible appeal.
Good afternoon, Leslie.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The topic of the Watson Lake Total Maximum Daily Load Report for nutrient targets has been before you on several occasions since about 2013. The Public Works Department has been the lead with assistance from other departments as needed on this topic. Today I'd like to help set the intent for today's presentation that will be given by Dr. Ed Latimer. Dr. Latimer is the principal engineer of AMEC Foster Wheeler, and with his team of other scientific professionals were selected in 2013 to provide technical assistance to review the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality report. The next step for the city, if chosen by council, will be a formal action to appeal the TMDL as noticed in the Arizona Administrative Register. Today's information is not intended to assess the various combinations of future improvement efforts that may be necessary at the city reservoir. Doing so is several steps beyond where we're at today. We would like to refresh you on why the available data, its use, and the nutrient standards that are being applied should be further examined and discussed with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. City staff are present to assist with any questions you may have, and I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Latimer.
Thanks, Leslie. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Good to
sir.
be here. Let's get started here. So we'll begin by just having a very brief overview of the regulation that is in question here. And that's, it's a federal law, Clean Water Act, specifically 303, which is water quality specific. And what it requires is that states define or identify the water bodies that are impaired from a water quality standpoint and report those every other year. And then to prioritize these water bodies and develop TMDLs for them. So what is a TMDL? The abbreviation stands for total maximum daily load, and really nothing more than just a regulatory term that defines or refers to the maximum amount of a pollutant that can enter a water body and still maintain the water quality standard for that water body. So in essence, what the TMDL does is it defines the reduction that needs to occur from a particular stakeholder to achieve the water quality standard that's desired or necessary to achieve for that water body. So say, for example, 100 units of a pollutant is the water quality of that body, and the TMDL is 40. It means that 60 units of that particular pollutant need to be eliminated or reduced or taken out of the stream going into that water body. So there are 2 TMDLs being developed by the state for the Granite Creek watershed, and the 2 are listed there on the screen for you. The one that we're going to focus on today is the Watson Lake TMDL, and the water body is impaired for nutrients, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as pH and DO, or dissolved oxygen. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the graphic. The watershed is delineated in green. The lake is in red. Actually, everything in red is the impaired bodies in question here. And then, so the focus being the lake, and then Prescott's, the city's contribution to the impairment in the lake. This is simply just a cover of the 70-odd page TMDL that was recently issued by ADEQ defining the TMDL. It's got a final February 2014 date on it, but actually that should be February 2015. It hasn't been updated by them, but that's just kind of for your convenience to recognize the document. If you ever want to see it or read it, that's the cover page. So real quick, a timeline of what's happened here over the years and where we're at. So it all started back in 2004 when EPA, with ADEQ input, defined Watson Lake and Granite Creek as impaired water bodies based on water quality sampling that took place before then. Between 2004 and the 2010-2012 timeline there, a lot of data collection took place, a lot of analysis by experts and ADEQ to get their arms around what was going on at the lake, with public meetings taking place throughout 2010, 2011, and 2012, and the dates when those occurred are shown there. With the last public meeting in October 2012, shortly thereafter, the city decided it was in their best interest to retain a consultant to assist with the technical aspects of the TMDL. So in 2013, they procured or retained those services, and then the consultant performed an evaluation of all the studies that ADEQ was using as a basis for the TMDL. And then it also, in that year, we had the opportunity to sit down with ADEQ staff to discuss these concerns. Nothing really happened from that meeting. Fast forward to April 1st of 2014, that's when ADQ issued the draft TMDL, which in regulatory terms, that's what they're proposing to issue as a TMDL, and it's open for public comments, a 30-day comment period. The city actually submitted comments on that draft TMDL, as did other stakeholders, and in time for the state to consider the comments. Nothing took place until, let me see, is that right? Yeah, okay, I guess we're right. So what were the main issues of concern to the city regarding the draft TMDL? There were three main ones, and those are listed there on the screen. The numeric water quality standards that ADQ was using in terms of the water quality of the lake that needed to be achieved. The model that was used to model the lake to come up with the reductions that were laid out in the TMDL, and then the limited stream flow and water quality data that was used for model calibration and defining the TMDL. So those were the big three ones, if you will. Fast forwarding here in terms of where we're at now, and March 6th, almost a year after we submitted, the city submitted comments to the state on the draft TMDL. They issued their official responses to comments, and these were published in the Arizona Administrative Register. And what that does is it essentially officially starts a 45-day appeal window, by which at the end of that window, then the only step remaining for the TMDL to become official is EPA actually approving the TMDL. So it's probably important to note that the final TMDL was made public shortly thereafter, so it was available. In reviewing the TMDL, it was obvious that the TMDL essentially remained unchanged from the draft TMDL. And with respect to the responses to the comments that were submitted, it was pretty obvious that ADQ was not didn't intend to change anything regarding the the big issues that were brought up as concerns. So we're at this point now where the city objects to the scientific approach that was used by ADQ to set the TMDL, and also on the quantity and quality of the data that was used to develop the TMDL. And because, in essence, from a statutory standpoint, this is the last opportunity that the city has to formally go on record with regarding the technical concerns that the city has about the TMDL. The city staff is interested in appealing the Watson Lake TMDL, or that's what they're recommending. So assuming the council approves moving forward with the appeal, what shows on the screen here are other things, other actions, other considerations that city staff are working on as work efforts, if you will, that are either necessary as next steps or things that ultimately need to be done in order to deal with the TMDL. TMDL is not going to go away. It's required because of water quality elements, but how we get to what we need to implement is the element here. So in summary, it is recommended that the city appeal the Watson Lake TMDL before it's formally approved by EPA, giving it the status of law, and then upon council direction today, an item will be placed on the April 14th council agenda for formal approval of the appeal. And that concludes my presentation, or the city's presentation on this matter, and open for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, if you could explain in lay terms, what scientific approach are you questioning that the EPA used? or the ADEQ?
The scientific approach that was used is the actual model that was used to come up with the TMDL thresholds for the lake. So a very simplistic model was used called bathtub, and we strongly believe that there are other models that are better suited to simulate the very complex biochemical and physical processes that are taking place in the lake. As you know, the lake has a lot of sediment. There are a lot of biochemical processes taking place in there, and the simplistic model that was used, I don't think it goes sufficiently enough to demonstrate the true nature of all the processes that are taking place in the lake. So a better model with better quality data and more complete data sets would be more appropriate to come up with the TMDL for the lake.
I'm not saying I'm against the appeal. In your experience, would an alternative model that you're suggesting, has it been receptive in the past by these folks?
You're referring to ADEQ
Yes.
then being open to changing a TMDL? You know, I don't know of any case in the past that has occurred, but I'm not aware of all the various TMDLs I've worked with in the past. To my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie. Mayor, thank you. And about a year ago, the Water Issues Committee met to discuss some of the recommendations and discussion in the draft TMDL. And at the time, staff's recommendation to us was, let's go through the comment period, see if we can find some resolution with ADEQ. Clearly, that didn't get us where we want to be. I, for one, would support giving staff the tool to move forward on appealing this. And I've got confidence that we can probably get to a better place. It's definitely an issue that the city needs to address, and I want to make sure we have all the best information to make the best policy decision. So I'd be fine with seeing this come back next week and vote on it.
Jane.
John or Dr. Latimer, could you explain to us what is involved in an appeal? Is it litigation? Is it administrative? What's the cost, and what is the risk to the city?
Well, the Mayor Council, the appeal is to an administrative law judge, and so it is, I guess, litigation in that sense. Process-wise is if we get authorization next week to file an appeal, we sort of send a letter to ADEQ and the administrative law judge, or the administrator of the administrative law judge, and ask, and put them in the notice that we're filing an appeal of this TMDL study for a number of sort of reasons. Statutorily, ADEQ is supposed to take into account a bunch of different factors, which they did not in this modeling. They didn't take into account historical factors of the water. They didn't address environmental, economic, or technical feasibility of meeting the requirements. They improperly calculated the cost and benefit of achieving the allocation, among other things, and they failed to consider the climate and geography of Watson Lake. Essentially, the modeling was done, as far as I understand it, based on sort of a national model, and not taking into account the geography and climate of central or Arizona. So the process is, once we file the appeal, a hearing, essentially a mini trial, is supposed to be held within 60 days. In that time frame, there is a process or procedure for a mediation type attempt where the city and ADEQ would attempt to sort of reach a resolution, a settlement, if you will. If that's not, if we go that route and it's not successful, then we go to the hearing. As far as cost goes, our plan is to handle the case in-house, so there's no outside legal costs or legal fees. However, we would use our expert as an expert witness, and there's obviously fees for that kind of testimony and prep, and there may even be some discovery. So, but I think the real question from my understanding, is, and put it this way: if the city's not successful, this is the result we're stuck with. If we are successful, what we would ask the judge to do is to order ADEQ to use a different our proposed model or modeling, which, as I understand, is a sort of more rigorous modeling, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to arrive at a different result, but from the more rigorous modeling, you get a more reliable result. Because from the result, what has to happen is then you have to do your remediation or your mitigation. And so the risk of not appealing is we're stuck with this result, and then we have to come up with plan or plans to remediate. And there's no assurances that the plan you come up with, let's say it's dredging, is going to actually achieve the result that this TMDL says you have to achieve. So it could be a substantial cost. The TMDL doesn't give you the plan to fix it. It just tells you this is where you have to be at. So with no appeal means that this becomes the adopted enforceable TMDL. If we appeal, our goal, I guess, would be to have the judge require ADQ to use that more rigorous modeling to get a more reliable, more accurate TMDL result.
What is the consequence of doing nothing?
You're stuck with the current TMDL, which I would defer to our folks here in terms of then we would have to figure out a plan, and I'll let them get into the detail, on how to remediate. And the problem, as I understand it, is with that plan, there's no guarantee or no assurance that that remediation would actually achieve the TMDL. So so I think that the goal again of appealing and getting this more rigorous or more reliable result also lets you focus on the particular areas of what you need to achieve. I don't think from what I understand, there's no question that there's going to have to be some remediation. It's the question of how much and what needs to be remediated. And so not appealing this current draft becomes final.
What if we had no remediation plan and we did nothing? Isn't there a financial penalty?
Well, we would. That's not an option, because what you would end up happening is ADEQ would either require, similar to some of our other environmental issues where you go under consent order or consent judgment, where ADEQ would order you to go and do whatever it takes, essentially, to do the remediation. So once this becomes official or the final determination, then we either have to come up with a plan that achieves the result. If we do nothing, ADEQ simply essentially sues the city and says to a Superior Court judge, issue a judgment or an injunction telling the city they have to take action to remediate.
Well, what I'm getting at is, what's the ultimate consequence? I understand that EPA could levy fines that are rather costly against the city. Leslie, can you address that?
I think we're actually still waiting, so I think we're so much further back down the road yet to know exactly what's happening, and I think that's this community, all of us here believe in healthy watersheds and healthy water bodies. With this TMDL, it's not, the city's been down this road before. So the Sundog wastewater treatment plant did discharge into Granite Creek quite a while ago, many decades ago, and it was considered effluent dominated. And then the Department of Health Services came in, and what the city did was made sure that they stayed in step and worked with the regulatory agency to come to an agreeable outcome, because what we see is that the regulatory agency has certain rules they must meet, but it's hard for them to see on the other side of the fence of what we're challenged with. So with this appeal that we're seeking is we'd like to continue conversations with the Department of Environmental Quality. look at those regulatory things deeper with them in terms of how does this TMDL ultimately affect the MS4 permit, which we know there could be penalties or conditions, compliance requirements. But that really hasn't been worked out clear enough in the staff's mind to know what's going to happen next necessarily. So I think we all value these water bodies, the creeks themselves and the reservoirs. And it's worth the time to sit down and talk one more time, put down the issues on paper, explain why the city has concerns, their top 3 concerns, and then ultimately so that we find a way to spend the monies that we're able to put towards this in their most effective manner.
I'm not advocating that we do nothing, but I think the council and the public needs to understand that there is a cost,
certainly,
to doing nothing.
Certainly. And we don't want to misguide our efforts and spend monies in a way that doesn't really get us to closer to an end point that we would all like to see. We might need to study this, give it some more work, and I think it's, once again, a little challenging because the TMDL is really meant for this water body, but I don't think everybody understands the multiple uses on this water body. So we have another sister agency, the Department of Water Resources, that holds our decision in order, and we have to move water off that water body to uphold our water supplies for the community. So we'd really like to work with the Department of Environmental Quality to have them see all these other things that are going on. The recreational levels we like to try to keep for fisheries, for the people who like to use them, with their kayaks and things like that. So we really have a much bigger picture, I think, than what is being seen through maybe the Department of Environmental Quality's eyes and regulatory structure.
Okay. Jim.
Thank you. Leslie, thank you. I really appreciated the information in the packet. Of course, as you're well aware, I read the TMDL study and all that stuff. And what I fully haven't gotten a grip on is that, number one, I realize in 98 or whenever it was, we were declared out of safe yield, and we bought the lakes as a permanent sort of a dedication for assured water supply and recharge and blah for addressing that issue. And I realize when we use the terms lakes, that's inaccurate. They're reservoirs. They don't have inflow, outflow, etc. And you got a stagnant pool of water sitting there because of that. I also realize that stagnant pool of water, whether it be Watson or Willow Lake from time to time, everything that's in those bodies of water that people of Prescott didn't do. You got the Forest Service with their controlled burns. You have the mining industries. You had the reservation with industrial uses such as creosote plants. You have ADOT with drainage runoff and everything else that goes down, and guess where it sits? Water runs downhill, and it goes through the creeks that run through the city of Prescott, and it ends up in these 2 reservoirs, and there it sits. And what I would like to know is, who are we working with to see who's going to be solely held accountable? I mean, this is another one of those deals. Let's stick the citizens of the city of Prescott. From my reading of this, and there's something wrong here when we're a governmental agency, as we're working with another governmental agency, and we're trying to work with other governmental agencies, and at the end of the day, it's the people of Prescott that are being told, hey, guess what you guys have got to pay for? Something that somebody all over the state of Arizona has contributed to.
And I think these are some of the questions that the staff has had and reasons for sitting down with the Department of Environmental Quality one more time. The TMDL report does speak to what they call waste load allocations, so they do try to divvy this up of what might be background from the forest, what might be ADOT, and then what is based on surface area or area that the city covers, what is a part of the city's responsibilities. But these are all questions that really have to be dug into much more to have a good working relationship with this agency, and for them to see the other working relationships we have to have with other state agencies, and to make sure ultimately that when we decide, the council, the community decides how they're going to spend their monies, we make sure that we know what our end point is and why we're moving a certain direction.
All right, well, thank you for your explanation. And I'm not the water expert, so to speak, but I can smell a rat real quick, and I smell one here. And I would agree with doing something, and that something may be to appeal at this point. So that's where I'm at.
Craig, did you have something?
Well, Leslie touched on waste load allocation, and we did have a meeting with ADQ and talked about that, and you know, we got a response, which is a pretty general response, about how they allocate waste load. That is, they look at the watershed, they look at what's going on in the watershed, who owns what property, what activities there are, and so forth, and do some assessment of that, and then point the finger at particular parties who are contributors and allocate this waste. But at the end of the day, suppose that the TMDL was issued, it became law, we did everything we could, but we don't contribute 100% of the problem, and so suppose the TMDL, the water quality requirement, was not met. Then what? That's why we need to have that communication in a more formal setting, so we get to the heart of some of these matters. Because we could spend a lot of money doing everything we had to do, and if those reservoirs still do not meet water quality criteria, what public interest ultimately has been served? And you know, the irony here is that the water quality in the lakes meets the requirements for recharge of Arizona Department of Water Resources. But what you've got is you've got different agencies, and even within ADQ, you've got different divisions. And I will tell you that you could have 3 different meetings with 2 departments and different divisions, and you're going to see each of them has a focus like this. It's not holistic, it's compartmentalized. So we really do need to have some very specific formal dialogue with this agency to make sure we know exactly how this is going to work, because at the end of the day, the citizens of Prescott are going to pay, if not part of this, perhaps more than we should be paying.
Thank you for your comments, and if you remember correctly, Mr. Manager, I brought it up before, maybe instead of using tourism promotion dollars to promote the rodeo, we ought to be using the tourism promotion dollars to clean up the mess the rodeo left in the reservoirs. So I just bring those things up from time to time. It may be an issue of priorities when it comes to budget.
Steve, go ahead.
I'm not sure you have enough time to listen to me babble on about what I think about the whole thing, but I have not further seen the report on the drilling of the lake bottom, what type of sediment at what level was created in those lakes and how they were generated. Number one, I would like to know that. Number two, they are indeed reservoirs, and from my standpoint, in the years past, CBID drained those reservoirs down to absolute zero water. If it truly is a testament about PDML and being fined and not having a water quality body, why don't we drain those lakes, and then how can they fine us? I don't think they could. But if we drained those lakes and went in and dredged those lakes to Salt River Project levels, moved the dirt out to Chino Valley to one of our hundreds of pieces of acres of property out there, we don't know whether we can apply that dirt that comes out of that lake bottom topically, or whether it's hazardous if it's pulled out. There are so many unanswered questions for somebody to step up and want to find the city of Prescott without giving us some kind of direction. I don't think it's a rat, I think it's a mouse.
Those are your comments? Okay.
Yeah, those are my comments.
Okay.
I just think that we're sitting here waiting for somebody to find us without having the knowledge to be able to move forward, to know who is going to help us pay for these things. We don't know what the cost is going to be. We don't know whether oxygenation of the lakes would help. We don't know any of those elements, but yet we're being asked to make a decision. But I would agree that we need to delay this, and we need to take it the next step further, because I think for the state to want to find a community without giving us specific answers of what we can do to alleviate the problem, I think it's absolutely absurd.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. I want to go off the script here for just a moment. I was asked earlier in the day, as a matter of fact last week, by an individual that has done a lot of work on the lakes. He wanted to make a few comments. So Gary Warab, why don't we listen to you, and then I'll have some comments I want to make.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question first to the doctor. Are you questioning the two studies that were done by Dr. Paul Gramillion and Dr. David Walker, or do you accept those as legitimate studies?
No, those were two of the studies that we evaluated, we reviewed, and had developed a number. Oh, can you hear me? All right, sorry. Yes, those two studies were two of the several studies that we evaluated in 2013 and developed review comments for the state to consider, and we covered those concerns with them when we sat with ADQ in late 2013.
I don't think you answered my question. The question is, do you accept them as scientific data and fact?
They're studies. They're sound in terms of the studies that, the intent of the study. We just had concerns about some of the approaches that were taken and the length of data collected, a number of other issues.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand that. I was responsible for requesting the core sampling, which I have the studies here by Dr. Paul Gramillion. And I worked with both scientists in studying. I'm sorry that we missed Steve Blair that day we did the sampling. I wish he could have gotten on the boat with us. I think it's important for the public to understand in a language that's very simple. I have read these two reports. I'm not a scientist. They're very difficult to understand, except for the conclusion. This is the 1984 water quality study of Watson Lake. I'd like to summarize all three this simply. Drain and dredge the lakes, put aerators in the bottom, and move on. Study them afterwards. In essence, what we're talking about is a machine that has been fueled with bad fuel for many, many decades. If it was a car, it would no longer be running. The engine would be plugged up. The fuel that's coming to the lakes no longer makes a difference. Those lakes are so impaired and eutrophication has proceeded so strongly that no matter what you add to them, if you try to put good fuel in, it won't affect the lakes anymore at all. They're an entity to themselves. They have been ruined by continuous eutrophication, by low dissolved oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. And if we look at the watershed, we already know that the highest concentration of E. coli, low nitrogen, phosphorus, and low dissolved oxygen now collects the highest percentage at Watson Woods. So we look at that as the gas station that's been fueling them from the seepage from broken sewer lines that are now, I'm told, starting to be fixed, from lots of other entities. We can see that over the years since the inception of the lakes, they have been destroyed by a process that cannot be changed until the lakes are drained and dredged and aerators put in. Now, they quantify and qualify those approaches, and those are the best recommended approaches. So, and again, if you go upstream and repair that, which eventually needs to be done, that won't affect the lakes at all. They have come to a place where nothing that you do upstream will affect them until you drain and dredge them. And I agree with Councilman Blair. Takes this stuff out. We're not talking about the entire lakes. We're talking about the southwest end of Watson Lake, and that's not that difficult to do. In fact, before this year, we could have easily gone in and done some of that repair and then decided where to take the materials. We had other designs, we had engineering designs to reuse what we could, especially from Willow Lake, which we don't consider as impaired, although the water is coming from Watson to that. But it's not the water that's a problem. You can empty them out and put more water in, you're going to get the same results because the bottoms of the lakes are in terrible shape. The coring samples went all the way back to 1947, and they revealed that no matter what you do anymore, you have to take that out of there. The water won't make a difference. So the engine is broken. It needs to be overhauled. You can fix this machine. You can fix this car. You can put good fuel in it, and you'll have good success. Again, you will have to monitor from now on. But to now go back upstream and monitor, to me, is futile. The sewer lines that are broken aren't fixed. We have no one who's studying the septic systems to determine which are good, which are bad. That's a fact. So to me, I don't totally agree with ADQ. I didn't from the beginning, but I totally agree with the 2 scientific studies that were done that these lakes need to be drained and dredged. That's their conclusion in a nutshell. I'm not a scientist, but I know how to read, and their conclusion is drain and dredge the lakes. Put aerators in the bottom. You can use alum if you want, but the highest recommendation is drain and dredge them. The public needs to be aware of, no matter how much you appeal, you will have to do something eventually, and that's the only positive conclusion.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a little bit away from where we're going on today's subject, but obviously the question today is, do we appeal this to give us some time to go to the next level?
And Mayor, this is not an action item today. It's up to the council to direct whether to have an item on the agenda for next week to take action.
Yeah. Enough of...
I'd like to see it on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, then staff directed to bring this back on the 14th. Okay.
I didn't want to say anything, just want my glasses.
Okay, let's go to item B.
Item B, Library Advisory Board and Friends of the Prescott Public Library presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. April is traditionally the month when National Library Week is celebrated. In other years, the mayor has issued a proclamation recognizing National Library Week. This year, both the Library Advisory Board and the Friends of the Prescott Public Library wanted to address the council about the role of the library in the community and their roles in supporting that. And I'll let the spokesperson for each group introduce themselves, and I'll be available for any questions after their presentation.
What do you want?
Mayor and Council, thank you for letting us be here to speak with you today. My name is Debbie McCaslin, and I'm the chair of the Library Advisory Board. We have been busy since our inception about 3 years ago, and in our first year, we reviewed the library, how it functions, what's involved with it, what are their goals, their objectives, how they serve the various people in our community. From that, we were also charged to come up with a way to help recover some of the cost of the library. So we reviewed the services that the library provides that are not part of the core services of a free public library. And we instituted charges for library card replacements, fees to return borrowed books from other libraries through the interlibrary loans, test proctoring fees, copy fees were increased, and then additional fees were just for replacing lost books. These fees were just reviewed last month and have been increased again for these different categories. We don't charge for core services because that's not what a free public library does. The Prescott Library was started in 1903 with a grant for the Andrew Carnegie Foundation as a free public library. The fees were matched by the community, and that trend has continued throughout the years. When we renovated the library, there was a massive fundraising activity that was undertaken where the community members donated over $1 million to help provide additional funds for the library renovation. The library is my favorite place in town. I'm an avid reader. It's a wonderful function, and I support it totally. I'm glad I'm able to be on the advisory board. In our second year of activity, the strategic plan was developed. This was funded by the Friends of the Library. It involved about 20 people from the community, stakeholders, and they came up with a plan to further increase the library's efficiencies. They have developed a focused plan for activities and staff time, which is limited. The three core components of that were to create young readers with the early literacy program, satisfy curiosity and lifelong learning, and visit a comfortable space. So the goals were identified, objectives, and activities. This was started shortly after the plan was implemented, and at this point it's 80% completed. So the library staff can direct their limited time and resources fulfilling the needs of our community. I also have Sharon Seymour, who's also on the Library Advisory Board, with a few comments.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to offer a view of our library in the community. As Debbie just mentioned, our public library has been a feature of the town since 1903. And Andrew Carnegie emigrated from Scotland to the U.S. in 1848 and was a self-made millionaire by the end of the century. He's contributed millions of dollars toward establishing free public libraries across the country, valuing libraries as a place in which anyone, regardless of economic means, could find the resources they needed to bootstrap themselves to success. Today's library is, if anything, even more of a collaboration than the original Carnegie Library. Community members, schools, government agencies, the Friends of the Library, the Yavapai Library Network, and the Yavapai County Free Library District, as well as the Arizona State Library, all play a part in the contribution Prescott Public Library makes to our community. The library budget reflects this. About 25% of the budget consists of taxes collected by the County Library District. Another significant amount, which you will learn about shortly, is provided by the Friends of the Prescott Public Library, one of the groups that was important in the renovation, a nonprofit organization completely supported by community donations. The cooperative efforts of the 42 members of the Yavapai Library Network allow our library to offer over 1 million items to users, from preschool to graduate school, from books, magazines, and research databases to do-it-yourself help, homework help for students, and more, contributing to the learning, leisure, and growth of anyone who chooses to use this cornucopia of resources. Prescott Public Library offers vital services to students from kindergarten through high school, especially in the face of reduced funding for education. Class visits to the library, librarian visits to schools, and online access to study resources support our community's children in building the skills they will need to compete in a challenging economic environment. Job seekers find assistance with computer skills, preparing resumes and job applications, and searching for work. Computer club volunteers help library patrons build computer skills for job and family-related tasks. Teens from the library's Teen Advisory Group participate in many activities, including a national program for reviewing new young adult books. The teens have even presented this project at an American Library Association conference. Outlining all the programs and benefits offered at the library by staff, community experts, and interest groups and volunteers would more than fill our brief time with you today. Visit the library, open our webpage at prescottlibrary.info, take advantage of the tremendous range of resources offered at the library through the collaborative efforts of our community. Thank you. And now, Kathy Cunningham, President of the Friends.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity for us to come here today and voice our support of the public library. Obviously, I'm a cheerleader if I'm working with the Friends group. And I would like just briefly for people who are standing here behind me, who are here in support of the public library, to stand. Okay, thank you. You've recently heard quite a bit about what the library does specifically and about the history of the library. I want to simply address very quickly what the Friends does. We were founded in 1974, over 40 years ago, by community leaders who recognize that the library needs additional support. Our mission is to generate public and governmental support, raise funds to supplement city appropriated funds, identify and respond to needs, and provide financial and other assistance to the library. But again, the city has accepted and needs to maintain the primary funding through taxes as your responsibility. Today, Friends continues the tradition of support. All of the programs, the outreach processes that you've heard about with other speakers were underwritten by Friends. We supported the teenagers, we support continuing staff education, and we support a large number of facility maintenance priorities. We have in the past helped remodel the teen zone. We have helped develop the early literacy rock garden for children. And this year alone, we are buying furnishings for a new quiet zone on the 3rd floor level that will include carols and furniture for people who wish to escape some of the hubbub of the main floor. We are purchasing carols and table dividers for the main floor for people who want a little more privacy in their work. And we are also purchasing carpeting for the 2 main levels of the library. This is with money raised through memberships, donations, and the book sale. The book sale is also responsible for funding all of these children's programs and all of the adult programs. When the tots come in, the librarian doesn't just grab a book. Every book selected has been picked for literacy development. There are programs for children coming in after school, for teens. We underwrote the cost of them going to a national convention because obviously the city budget cannot afford those things. So we provide also materials. One of the things, if anybody's wants the latest John Grisham or Brad Thor or Jan's book, there are obviously too many people wanting it, and it is the Friends that buy the additional copies, so that money does not come out of the book acquisition budget. Friends does this because we believe in a free public library, and we work to enhance this library for all of our citizens. This library is the source of information and knowledge in all its formats. This includes hardback books, paperback books, magazines, audio visual materials, audio materials, and now electronic media, which simply is an extension of books. And as we all know, internet connectivity for the citizen in America today is essential, and the library also provides that. And we need to keep these sources free. I have lived in a country where there are no libraries, where information is only by rumor, where people do not continue learning after they graduate from high school. And believe me, where I was living is in the center of one of the biggest chaoses this world has known in recent history. The availability of information, of knowledge, of resources is so important to the functioning of our democracy that we at Friends strongly support the library and the dissemination of information to our community. We are working hard to expand our database, our donor membership, and we have instituted a whole series of policies so that we can go into the community and do some stronger fundraising to increase even further our support of the library and to hopefully help you mitigate some of the expenses. So we thank you for supporting this vital community asset that is so important to the people of Prescott. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Kirkendall and council members, thanks for this opportunity to speak. My name is June Sherrod, and I'm no newcomer to Prescott. I've been here since 1954, and I'm also a reader. I just started my 49th book for this year. I use the library about 5 times a month, and I belong to a book club that's just sponsored by the library. I also give 2 seminars a year there at the library, and I attend some others that are presented there. My comments are tell you how popular this library is. Most of the time, the parking lot is filled, and I have to park on Marina by the police station. And whenever I am there, most of the computers for patrons are in use, The shelves set aside for books held on reserve are always full. The book sale area always has people perusing their shelves to buy a secondhand book. I have never, underline never, had a request refused for a book. If this library doesn't have it, they will borrow it from another library. All age groups use the library. I see mothers bringing their toddlers, grammar school kids there, teenagers, adults, and the older retired people. You will see the latter in seating provided in the library. When this library was in its infancy, my husband and I donated considerable money because we believed so much that every town deserves a library. This one is top notch. Don't let it become anything less with reduction of funding. Our library is one of the things that makes Prescott a wonderful place to live. And I just was talking to someone here, and they said one of the first things we checked out before we moved here was the library. Any library is the soul of a city. If you personally do not use the library or ever go there, please do not base your vote on that fact. But think of the almost 1.5 million people who use that library and have it as part of their lives. There are almost 481,000 people who do use that library. It's so important to us who do use it. Thank you.
Thank you. More to come?
No, I just,
Okay.
do you have any questions or?
Okay, the council, any questions from the council? Comments?
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
I think you all do a great job, and what impresses me more than just the building and the facilities are the people who are so passionate and dedicated to making that library a real wonderfully great place to be and to learn and to get information. It's kind of like the indoor courthouse square that we can brag about in Prescott. And I too have heard many times from people who recently moved here that one of the things they checked out about Prescott before making the decision to come here was the library. And they found our library to be a really top library in all their travels. And I'm really proud of it, proud of all of you.
Thank you.
Charlie.
Mayor, thank you. Just echoing Jean's comments, thank you all very much for your commitment to the library. And my question, Roger, is when this comes forward in the budget process, we're talking about the library, it was indicated that there were some new fees that have been implemented and some adjustments made. I assume those projections will exist in the budget workshop that we'll take a look at the library with?
What we can with Mark's help.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, Mayor. And I don't think anybody up here disagrees with anything you guys have said today. I've been to the library too, and the lines for the computers are really long. Everybody uses it greatly. I don't think we've come to grips yet with how tight money is. I kind of invite you guys to stick around for the next item, not just leave after this library item, because we're going to be discussing a lot of this. And you know, maybe come up with some suggestions yourself on what we should cut. You know, if money's tight, do we need to cut back on our police? Do we need to cut back on our fire? Do we need to cut back on the other city services that are offered out of the general fund? I mean, this discussion is real, and I think I've said this recently. It seems like the government has cried poor for so long that I think people get very numb to it. And I mean, it's real now. When looking at the numbers, it's real. There's going to be a lot of hard decisions. You guys keeping the library together for so long has been a great thing, but we're all going to have to work together to figure out how to get through this. There's a lot of challenges ahead. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, are you still there?
I am.
Any comments?
Not at the present time.
Okay. Okay, Charlie's on his way back. Go ahead. Let's go to the next item.
Item 1C, discussion of revenues, expenses, and possible actions to address city finances and obligations in fiscal year 2016 and subsequent fiscal years.
Mayor and Council, I'd like to introduce this topic with some background about our budget process, fiscal year 2016 budget process so far. And then we'd like to present some new information developed for today as a prelude to budget workshop number 3, which will be held next Tuesday morning, a week from today on April 14th. So let me first give an overview for the purpose of background of what we've done so far during our budget workshops, and then we'll get into the new information. Budget workshop number 1 was held on February 12th, and what we did at that time is we focused on 2 funds, the city's general fund and the basically the Streets and Open Space Fund, from which our pavement management program is supported. On March 24th, the Council considered ordinance number 49271465, the purpose of which is to call a special election, or would be to call a special election on August 25th to vote on a transaction privilege tax dedicated to streets and roads, and that council consideration of the ordinance tabled the ordinance until the voting meeting of next week, April 14th. Also at the March 24th meeting, council meeting, the item on the council agenda regarding the public safety personnel retirement system, or what we call PSPRS, employer rate for fiscal year 2016 was deferred to May 2015. You recall that that deferral resulted from PSPRS granting more time to cities and counties all over the state to make the decision of whether to select a 3-year phase-in option or come up with the money in the upcoming fiscal year. As we discussed at that time, that's an important decision which relates to the public safety personnel retirement system and the unfunded liability and what it really costs to address that. For example, if that phase-in is 3-year phase-in is not selected, that is, the city bites off the entire amount for fiscal year 16, that means an additional increase in expense to the general fund of at least $900,000. Our budget, and we're still fairly early in the budget process, our budget is not balanced. We don't have $900,000 to pay that. What we would have to do is look at service cuts to accommodate that. But again, we've got quite a ways to go. In addition, on March 24th and in some of the previous discussions, in addition to streets, 2 other potential sales tax increments have been identified. And those 2, in addition to streets, are open space and public safety. While public safety annual operating and capital expenses are certainly important, really the elephant in the room that we have not explored in depth in public, and we'd like to open that discussion today, is the topic of the unfunded public safety personnel retirement system liabilities for police and fire. As you will see in a few moments, the amount and the growth of that unfunded liability in PSPRS system overshadows the future of the city's general fund. We will demonstrate that for you. And the future of the general, as the general fund goes, so go the services it supports. And specifically, we're talking about police, fire, library, recreation services, and general government. So this is the topic we'd like to briefly focus on today, as I mentioned, as a prelude to a more detailed discussion proposed for next Tuesday's workshop. We have talked many times about election timeframes, and those are certainly important. In order to get an item on the August 25th what is the primary candidate election ballot. A special election must be called at next week's voting meeting of April 14th. So, as you can tell, April 14th is shaping up to be a very important day for decision making. Whether that decision is to put anything on the ballot or not put anything on the ballot, certainly it is a very important checkpoint for the issues that we are discussing. I want to make it very clear today that your staff is not proposing that any of these three items be placed on the ballot in any particular time frame. That is, streets, open space, public safety, or what we are now introducing as the unfunded retirement system aspect of public safety. Each of these and how they may interrelate to the others as ballot measures would benefit certainly from additional in-depth discussion. So with that background, we have prepared some new materials to describe the scale of the unfunded public safety personnel retirement system liabilities and the implications for future city services and amenities which are now being supported by the general fund. Every time we have a discussion of this topic, that is the public safety personnel retirement system, I think that certainly many of us think we should state a few things. And fundamentally, what you know and what we need to restate is that the City of Prescott participates in PSPRS, but it did not design it, nor does the City of Prescott have the ability to redesign unilaterally this system. As you know very well, the public safety personnel retirement system is different from the non-public safety or Arizona State retirement system in that it is not a pooled system. That is, there is a separate retirement account for the City of Prescott which has to stand on its own. It is a defined benefit system. The city has no control over cost increases or the benefits which are provided. Unfortunately, whether much needed pension reform happens or not, the city will be obligated to cover its unfunded liabilities by itself. They are enormous and they are growing. So how enormous are they and how are they growing? Firstly, we'd like Mark Woodfill to present the financial information regarding the unfunded liabilities, and then Allison Zelms will address the implications for the general fund, and that is non-public safety services, which are frankly severe.
Mayor, I have a question before you get started.
Go, Steve.
I just wonder, City Manager, if you're going to share with the council the cost per employee through ASRS opposed to cost per employee with PSPRS. I think the public needs to know the difference.
Okay. Well, that'll come forward in your presentation.
Do you have it with you?
I probably have it with me here. It wasn't part of this presentation, but give me 2 minutes. And let me see if I can find it here.
Mayor, while he's taking his 2 minutes, can I add something? I think as you threw out the disclaimers, Craig, at the beginning, I think it's also important to put out there that this is not the fault of our firefighters. It's not the fault of our policemen. This is the fault of a system that has been running unchecked and is broken.
That's absolutely correct.
Craig, I have a question also. What year, if you have the information, did the fund go negative? It's probably the wrong question, but when did the unfunded liability become greater than what the asset value was?
Well, Mayor, pensions, whether pooled or unpooled, generally will have some level of liability. If we look 10, 11 years ago, 12-year range, the fund was a lot more funded. I have specifics if you're interested in that. The reality is the benefits that were changed in the funds, the programs that were changed by the legislature through the PSPRS statewide board, and the and some investment losses that the PSPRS board as a whole experienced in the last 11 years have added significantly to the liability.
So the liability has grown for a period of years. And has the city done anything other than meeting the current requirements toward the paying off that liability?
As part of our rate, as part of our employer rate, which we talk about each year, a portion of that rate is for the normal retirement costs, which represent the retirement costs earned or associated with that years of service, and then another portion, a bigger portion, as of late, which we're going to talk about more here in a little bit, is for getting rid of that unfunded liability portion.
Okay. Have we reached a point yet in our public safety that we have more people, more personnel on retirement than we do that are active in the workforce?
Because of the structure of the PSPRS system and the allowance of programs such as the DROP program and the earlier retirement than normal retirement systems, and the fact that the city of Prescott, because of revenue restrictions over the last 7 or 8 years, has not been able to increase the size of our police force or our fire force as may normally have happened throughout time. We do have a higher percentage or a higher population of retirees or non-employees or non-contributing members than to contributing members.
Okay.
And just to give you an example of that, sorry I didn't have these out and ready. Looking at the police department, we have 67 active members and a total of 139 members. So it's right about half our active members contributing at the time. And our fire department is at 123 total members in the system, with only 53 of those being active currently. So again, they're definitely less than 50%.
If I could, with respect to Councilman Blair's request, we don't have that particular slide from a previous presentation, but again, we do have budget workshop number 3 next week, so we can make sure we have that loaded up to respond to his inquiry.
Okay,
I
Steve.
appreciate that, Mr. McCollum, and I just want to complete by saying thank you, Mark, for putting this together. I'm actually watching it on TV and find it very soothing. How's that? But I do want to make it very clear that PSPRS board in Phoenix, Arizona, even though they have faltered in meeting their goals, they continue in the past to give their executives 6-digit bonuses throughout the year. I think it's very irresponsible, and somebody has got to wake up and fix this system.
Okay. Craig, following on, but can we assume, did the council assume, we have approximately 300 and how many employees in ASRS?
We have about 400.
About 400 of our 500 employees are
yes.
in ASRS. Now, make sure we understand that fund is okay?
That fund is a different type of fund. As the manager said, the PSPRS board is a multiple employer agency fund where we stand on our own. Not only does the city of Prescott stand on our own, but actually our fire department stands on its own and our police department stand on its own. They're actually 2 separate pools with liabilities, where the ASRS is a multiple employer cost sharing entity where the liability in that pool is at that trust level, and ASRS is a much bigger retirement system as a whole. It is not, of course, 100% funded, as most pensions are not 100% funded, but it is in the 70-75% range. Its rate is 11%, 11.4, I think, for next year, compared to our fire rate, which is 74.9% of the pay. So you can see that the cost is significantly more for our employees in PSPRS, and it's significantly more unstable, which is what we're going to talk about here as we go through these slides.
Okay. So our discussion to attempt to bring our pension fund in an area that we can survive, we will not be looking at ASRS as a part of that solution.
Right, and again, the ASRS is a different type of fund. It's a separate trust, if you will. You know, the liability for that is held at that trust level. It's recovered annually through the rates, as opposed to the liability for our police and our fire pensions, which are the city's sole responsibility.
Yeah, it's a statewide pool.
Okay.
Could we back up just for a minute and go back to the basics and explain what is an unfunded liability?
Sure.
We have a retirement account.
We have a retirement account. Let me switch my screen here just to give you a visual to walk through. They're looking, this is our fire department. So if we look, the actuarial looks at all the potential future costs associated with the people who are vested or being vested as part of the pool or retired or somehow are going to receive a benefit from this pool. They take those costs projected out over years. They present value them back to the current value of looking at investment rates and inflation rates and other things that will affect those things. So if we look at this schedule, which is from 2003 to 2014 for our fire department, you can see that this actuarially accrued liability, which is what I just described, is $52 million, $52.5 million. The assets that are in our pool or in this trust for the fire are $16.7 million. So the difference between those two is the unfunded portion of that liability, which is $35,773,773. And as you can see, the jump, I mean, fire was a bad one to put up. There's been a couple of jumps in recent years, but the latest jump is related to a lawsuit called the Fields case, which was recently lost, which dealt with some pension reform that had happened. We had talked about that in an earlier budget workshop. Does that answer your question, Councilwoman?
Yes.
And let me just add that they said basically the retirement system says here's what you need to pay. Here's your employer rate for the upcoming year, and that's what we pay. Now, if you could turn back the clock, the city could have put in more money every year, which would have increased the funded portion and reduced the unfunded portion. But you know, did we have the money to do that during the recession? Well, maybe not. Is it required? Maybe not. Has there been discussion of pension reform, not only in this state, but other states, and you know, all those extreme cases we've seen on the news and so forth? Yeah, there sure is. But I guess what we're saying is that for the purpose of the city of Prescott in fiscal year 2016, we need to have a serious talk about this if we're going to address that unfunded liability as it relates to the future costs to the citizens of Prescott, because we're going to owe it. So it's time to really have the hard talk about that, whether pension reform occurs or not, because unless we do deal with it, it's going, as you'll see in a few moments here, it's going to have some dramatic effects on services the city provides.
Now, the information that I've received on pension reform, and there's no assurance that that's going to happen. It's a legislative process. Okay.
It definitely is a legislative process, Mayor.
Now, but anything that happens there would be forward-looking, not looking in arrears. Is that correct?
Generally, the way pension reform works, it is a forward-looking item. You know, you don't go back and change a retiree who's receiving a pension. There are several large notable groups working on pension reform, legislative groups at the state, finance officers around the state, the league. You know, there's several groups that are working on this. We will have pension reform because we need pension reform, just like most other states. It's not going to happen in the next month or 2 months. It'll be in the next year or two. But as the manager mentioned, whether we get it next week or 2 years from now, we still have to take care of these liabilities that exist out there on the books. And since we had the overhead up and I had the actuarial reports out, I just wanted to point out, as I mentioned earlier, the pension costs are made up of two components. This is our police actuarial contribution requirement page. You can see the normal retirement cost, 11.56, and this amortization of the unfunded liability, 54.6% of pay. That gets you to the 66.16. That's what we're talking about today, is that unfunded liability portion.
And Mark, so that, again, simply stated, for every dollar of payroll, we have to pay, under that chart, 66 cents to the retirement system on top of the dollar.
Correct. And it's not for that employee,
right,
per se. 57 or whatever it was, 54% of that is just to get rid of the liability, although it's figured on whoever you're paying now, because that's the way the pension rates work. It's on the portion. The problem is, or the issue is, as we looked at the other charts earlier, 35 million in police fund, 36 million in the fire fund of this outstanding liability need to be paid. Through the actuarials, they stretch those out. They've identified a 22-year cycle that those need to be paid over. And they've prepared and presented us two different options, which we talked about a week or two ago, related to the 3-year phase-in or the full current actuarial. Looking at the screen now, this is just looking at the unfunded actuarially accrued liability portion of our rate over the next 22 years under either one of these scenarios, the 3-year phase-in or the non-3-year phase-in. These are the amounts that we need to pay, need to contribute to eliminate those liabilities.
Now, during that 22 years, you're also going to be paying interest if you don't have the ability to sit down and write a check. Am I correct?
Correct, and that's included in these numbers. That's how come the 70, if under the 3-year phase-in, which is what we talked about and presented before, over the next 22 years, we will pay $167,194. I'm sorry, million. It's hard when you're dealing with pensions. The numbers are mind-boggling. $167,194,000, and that's an actuarial number, so it's subject to change every year depending on actual results. But it's not going to be a long ways off of that. It's going to be around there. It's a huge number. And I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just looking at your chart here, this is just paying the unfunded portion. So in 16, you're saying that to meet our payment obligation, it's $3.8 million. And in 24, it's basically $3 million more. And in 37, it's $7.8 million more.
That is
That's
accurate.
not paying for anything else of the city. That's just paying this.
It's not even paying all the pension costs. It's only getting rid of this unfunded liability, which is what we're talking about today. Is we need to do something with this. Has a high high interest rate, as the mayor was saying, related to the actuarially determined earnings rate of the pool. The other two columns on this sheet, the first 3 columns, are for the phase-in approach of the rates. We have an increase from the previous year. As you can see, it continues to step up each year. And then we have increase from our current year, which is 2015. And as you can see, by 2037, we're going to be paying $7.8 million more just for this portion of that. That's almost the cost of the fire department right now, just for this. It's a big issue. It's something that we have to look at as a community, and we're looking at as a state to kind of get pension reform. But even with that, we need to address this issue.
And Mark, based on your experience with the budgets, how much new revenue a year are we seeing increase?
The last 7 years have been very difficult, as you all know, as we go through and we come out, and we talk about the slow revenue growth, and we put together a budget to serve the citizens of Prescott, and we pull it together. We've used a lot of what we can use to get that done. Looking at taxes this year, our taxes and our intergovernmental revenues, which is 85% of the general fund, we're looking at probably about a $230,000 increase from the previous year.
So just taking off the top of my head, 10 years at $200,000 is $2 million. And in 10 years, our bill on this is going to cost us $4 million more just in the 1 year.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to break it down to the simplest so that it's understandable that within 10 years, we have to find $4 million of new revenue, or we have to cut $4 million of spending.
Exactly.
Just to cover this.
Just to cover this, not taking into account other increased costs. And that gets to general fund budgeting in whole. And we've talked about this through our other budget meetings. None like the water fund, where your costs are associated with your revenue. We sell more water, it costs more, but we have more revenue. In the general fund, there's no relationship of the services the community wants or the services the community demands and the actual revenue. The taxes come in at whatever the economic activity is or whatever the state formula is. They bear no correlation to what the community wants or expects for police or fire. It does correlate to what we're able to provide, obviously, because we will have to make cuts, as you pointed out, as these things happen. Without another revenue source, cuts will have to be made.
And there's no way to take water from the revenue fund and send it into the general or the trash fund or any of our enterprise funds. They cannot transfer over to help this out.
I would defer to legal, but I do not believe that is allowed under state law, because those are user fees. They need to be associated with the cost of providing those services, not providing an unrelated service.
Thanks.
So again, we have our two scenarios up here. If council in May, when we come back with the phase-in, decides we want to do the non-phase-in, we're not looking for 480 next year. We're looking for 1.4 million next year, which is 900,000 more, as the manager had mentioned earlier. It's going to be a significant change in the service levels that we're able to provide by our general fund departments, which are police, fire, parks, and library. Those are the only functions that we have that are paid out of these tax revenues. Everything else, even the general government portion of the general fund, is only partially paid out of the tax base. It's spread out because the general government function does stuff for all the enterprise funds. So only 25% of those functions are paid out of the general fund. Mayor, I would.
We'll try to stay on, but if it's short, well, go ahead.
It's really short. Talking about the three things that these or 3 or 4 things that pay into this. Is trails part of this? Can you take some trails?
The trails are part of Parks and Recreation. I mentioned recreation. Sorry.
I missed that then. Sorry.
I believe I did. If not, I apologize. It does include recreation. Yes. We looked at 3 different scenarios. As the manager mentioned, we talked about a public safety tax. We've looked at 3 different scenarios. A half-cent public safety tax, a 0.65, and a 0.75. The schedule is up on the screen. As you can see, if the faster you are able to pay this liability off, the more you can save in relation to that earnings rate that they have in the actuarial report. At a 0.75, we could save $80 million, 80.9 million over the next 22 years. At 0.65 is 53 million. At even 0.5 is 29 million. So that's less, obviously less cost out of the general fund, out of these areas. We have the estimated revenues there, and the period that it would be for: 18.5 years at 0.5, 11.8 or 12 years at 0.65, and 10 years, 9.6 at 0.75. We also included on this schedule just an estimate based on some of our assumptions there of what does a 0.5% tax mean to the average household in Prescott. So we took the average the median income, and we looked at spending surveys from the Bureau of Labor Standards, and we assumed that 100% of their taxable spending from their revenue or their income would be spent in the city of Prescott. At that, 0.5 would cost the average household $114 a year, or $115. Following on the screen, you'll see the next 22 years laid out by fiscal year. These are the cost savings that would happen in the general fund, which would be available to address the issues in the general fund that have been deferred because of tight revenues over the last few years. You know, things like facilities maintenance, vehicle replacement, which has been deferred, any funding of that, those type of things. The red lines indicate the point in time, basically, that the tax would be in place from the top to the red line. The savings, again, would go on beyond that, because once you pay off that liability, that 53% of the pension cost that is hitting the general fund right now would go away, and you would just have the normal retirement costs.
Mark, I want to be very clear that this particular analysis, this table, represents strictly focusing on the unfunded liability and making that go away. It's not a more general public safety tax where new money is being created to hire additional people or do things we're not doing now. That's not what this table is. So I want to make that distinction. That might be a little bit fuzzy. There was in previous meetings a discussion of a public safety tax, but this is not really the same thing. This strictly is very narrowly addressing the unfunded liability, which is enormous. And again, we haven't finished the presentation, but we'll tell you what the enormity of that will mean if it's not dealt with in terms of these other services and amenities, library, parks and recreation, anything else that's not public safety, which is supported by the general fund.
And with that, I'll turn over to Allison to talk about what the general fund may look like.
Thank you. We've been talking about the general fund and the impacts of this PSPRS unfunded liability that we don't have control over, that we owe. And this is the current fiscal year, FY15, not the one that we're working on for next year. But this shows you the general fund net of program revenues and cost recovery. So it's important to point out this is about $28 million. Generally, when we approve the general fund, it's larger than that, but what we took out here was any value that any of these different departments have from revenue. So this is the cost to the general fund tax dollars. You can't spend the library free library district funding on anything but the library. So this is the cost to the general fund tax dollars. It takes out any of the costs for general government that are actually being charged to other enterprise funds and things like that. This is the size of pie that we're dealing with. This is the pie that's going to be impacted by that last slide that shows the growth of the unfunded liability. And what it shows is that even in the current year, although fire and police are about 70% of this, a very large percentage of that is already our existing payments for the unfunded liability as well as the normal cost. So that 66% and that 75% for police and for fire is represented here. That's not something that we have control over, and it's going to grow. So you see that the other 30% of the general fund that's tax dollars is about 3% ASRS. That's all the other general fund employees that are not in the police and fire public safety pension. We have about 6% of that as the library. And obviously the library has quite a number of volunteers that allow it to stay at its current level of service, that we do not pay the volunteers. We have recreation services there. That's trails, lakes, maintenance, the tournament finance support that we have that's necessary, and all of those things. Economic enterprise is a very small amount, and then the rest of general government, finance, HR, all of those things that you have to have, whether you're a city or a private business, in order to pay the bills, get the money, pay the people, make sure that you're following rules and regulations. So within the first 3 years, you saw on the last slide, whether we phase in or we take all of the hit up front, after that first 3 years, you're talking about $1.9 million that you have to cut out of your budget without a new revenue source. And so what does that equal? That equals our library.
Okay, well, let's be clear on this. We are not saying that there cannot be other cuts in the general fund. And in fact, what we have recently done is for each of the principal departments supported by the general fund, police, fire, library, recreation services, for fiscal year 16, we have asked them to prepare a contingency plan of up to a 10% budget reduction. So even though this slide shows the library being gone in fiscal year 18, it's for illustrative purposes. Recreation services could have been reduced, leaving some library. Police or fire could have been reduced, leaving the library, and so forth. But this, I think, pretty graphically illustrates that we're talking about the unfunded liabilities eating the equivalent of the library department. So maybe this would be the equivalent of the library going away, but certainly there are other scenarios which, you know, for the increased cost, it could be distributed across the other departments.
But the 10% that you're referring to only has to do with operational. The unfunded debt service cannot be cut.
Correct. That's why even if you cut police and fire below the 25% and 33%, you're going to be at 11 and 10 of the general fund being for PSPRS for police and fire because it's a mandated liability. So you have to cut something other than the PSPRS sections of that pie. And as you saw from the slide 2 slides ago, it continues to grow and it continues to grow, and so you have to continue to plan to cut until, if you get to fiscal year 2033, you have to start cutting public safety because there's nothing else left in the general fund. And this is without any raises for 18 years. This is without maintaining the facilities. This is without probably having the new vehicle purchases that we have been able to support for police and fire and some of the other general fund operations over the last few difficult years. This is without having any new strategic initiatives come forward within the city. And this is without any new police and firefighters, because the parts of the pie that grew were PSPRS. They weren't, existing employees are going to be making what they were making 18 years ago in the police department. And so all of those costs are going to be going primarily for retirees that are retired, while the current employees are making what they made 20 years ago.
Yeah. And
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, this should be a huge wake-up call to people that are watching this. You know, the lack of funding that we have and where we're going to have to find the funding. My question would be to Mr. Palladini or the city manager, not that he doesn't deserve the term Mr. Manager, but we're able to charge for services such as trash, such as sewer and water as part of a user's fee. What portion in state law, or where is it in city code, that says we cannot charge for sending out our fire departments on emergency medical calls and recoup some of the costs that we pay as a city to the firefighters?
Well, I guess I can answer that. I don't have the statutory side in front of me, but there are provisions in the statute that don't allow for inside, for instance, the incorporated area of the city to charge people for response to fire calls, police calls, those kinds of things. Obviously, there are, fire districts have the ability to sort of not respond to somebody who doesn't pay a fee or doesn't pay an amount if it's outside of their district, or if they aren't paying their contribution. The fire department will literally show up and watch it burn and just make sure that it doesn't burn those properties that are actually paying the district, fees or whatever. But there are some, they're fairly nominal. I mean, there are some costs that may be recouped for certain responses. The one example that comes to mind is what's sort of referred to as the stupid motorist law. If somebody drives through a flooded wash when it's closed, you can recoup that cost, but those are so limited that there's really not any type of, it's just nominal in that regard.
Okay, and my final question, Mr. Manager, if we put it on the ballot as a public safety adjustment tax at 0.5, and it gets voted down, what's our next recourse, or do we have one other than to go to Central Yavapai Fire District and ask to contract out our fire services so that liability is not around the city of Prescott?
Well, the dilemma, I think, to restate, is that we cannot get rid of or simply sign away or contract away this unfunded liability. It is there. We owe it. And so if the city contracted with the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office for law enforcement, there would be a cost to do that, but that would not affect this particular unfunded liability, nor in the case of contracting with Central Yavapai would it affect this unfunded liability.
Thank you. I can see we're in a rock and a hard spot, and I hope the public sees it as well.
Okay, don't hang up. Chris.
And, just looking at your charts and seeing where it is, it looks like fire and police don't really grow. We're running them pretty much as efficiently as we can, even as we speak today. The fire guys have 3-man engine crews, can't go lower than that. The police are, we just got them up to their minimum standards of guys on the street. So I think when you look at cutting, it's going to be a serious change in the level of service if we do. And it all comes down to how fast you want that fire engine to get to your house, how fast you want that police car to get to your house. It's this public safety retirement that's blowing us out of the water.
And if I may, I think it's really important to point out again, in this current year budget pie chart, we have a lot of revenue sources that aren't shown here that do help us to be at the level that we're at, and they'll still help us, but they don't help us with that PSPRS liability. And so, for example, the fire department, if you see the bigger, they do have revenue that comes in. We provide fire service right now to the Yavapai Prescott Indian tribe, and we receive several $100,000s a year for that. But it's almost nothing compared to the increases it's 1 year of increases in the future years, and it's revenue that we're already receiving. So, we have a significant amount of volunteer service in the library that keeps it open for the hours that it's open already. We have thousands of hours, even just by one individual that does over-the-hill trail service, the over-the-hill gang trail service. Most of our trails are primarily basically maintained by volunteers with a volunteer coordinator. So we are very efficient and progressive in the way that we're delivering services in a lot of ways. Our automatic aid agreements, you've seen it in the newspaper with some of the challenges that are facing the other fire districts that surround us. We do work together with our neighbors already. They are seeing concerns in their own budgets, and every other city is going to be seeing some version of this. It's just a matter of, we are a smaller community in a more rural part of the community of the state that has some growth restrictions. We're not going to grow like Surprise and Buckeye and grow our way out of the problem the same way that they're going to.
And these are promises that we make to the public safety guys, police and fire. We tell them you're going to have this pension at the end of your time. And was talking with a guy at Central Yavapai that was brand new on the force, and he says, "Oh, I'm not counting on it. I got my own thing going on." But you know what? It's a promise that you make to these guys when they're done with this career that they'll have something to retire on. And when I look at fiscal year 33, it doesn't really look like we're going to be able to even keep that promise.
And police and fire personnel that are in PSPRS pay a portion of their pension. They don't pay nothing for this.
Right.
They will be up at about 11.7%, I believe, in next year's budget of their salary, also coming out on top of the city's portion.
Mm-hmm.
Craig and Allison, I'm going to ask a question. It may not be where you want to go yet. But if we kick the can down the road again this year, and we have seen no numbers, can I make any assumption that the 10% reduction that you are asking all departments to consider, does that lead us a direction that if we kick the can down the road again, that might be the reality of this next year's budget? Or do you want to? You don't have to go there if you do.
Well, I guess what I would say is that number one, the departments which we're discussing are those supported by the general fund, not the departments which are supported by user fees, i.e., solid waste and utilities. Although, as an aside, as we've said many times, as goes the general fund, so go the other departments. So, next week at next week's budget workshop, we're going to have a presentation on the classification and compensation study. If that indicates that we have certain classes or families of our employees, families meaning job families of our employees that are not at market, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. We're not going to be able to give any raises to correct, to adjust, and so forth. And I would think that if the past is an indication of the present and future, the city, through its leadership, will be disinclined to create different classes of employees, i.e. you can get a raise if you're in the water division, but you can't get a raise if you're in the general fund because there's no money to do it. So those are some of the implications. But more directly to your question, we have asked for these 10% reduction plans in order to understand what the effects are going to be, but we believe at this point in the budget process that we're going to have to make some cuts, and we're going to have to take some of that 10% from some of these departments. And the distribution of that, of course, will be a point of discussion with the council as we go forward. It's our job to identify what those cuts might be and to make certain recommendations, but ultimately it is the council that approves the budget. So we're looking at cuts.
Jane.
I'd like to get a more definitive answer from the legal department about what charges we can and cannot impose in the public safety area. For example, a medical response call. Can we bill the insurance company, the medical insurance company? I mean, there must be some types of charges that we can enact.
Well, I can address part of that now. Without having ambulance service, we really don't have any ability, because it's the ambulance service that bills the insurance. It's my understanding that cities that have recently gone to getting a certificate of necessity for ambulance service, Yuma being, I think, one of the more recent ones, that it is not a positive revenue source. In other words, the cost of running ambulances for that, and again, that notwithstanding the question of whether we could even get a certificate of necessity for Prescott, given the current ambulance service. But, the ambulance service bills the patient or the transportee. We really don't have any ability to bill for, I guess, the service of the paramedic. Now, obviously, there could be some arrangements done contractually with the ambulance service, but in terms of paying some of the cost of the paramedic who rides from the pickup site to the hospital. And I'll give you, for instance, in Glendale, when I was there, we had, I think, Southwest Ambulances, the ambulance provider, and they actually paid for positions to be essentially permanently assigned to an ambulance crew. So you have your two EMTs who work for the company, and you had a Glendale firefighter paramedic who was assigned to that ambulance. And one of the reasons for that was that, unless there was a need for one of the fire engines or fire trucks to roll. If it was strictly a medical call, the ambulance would roll out. The rest of the, the trucks didn't go, if it was a straightforward medical call. Obviously, if it's a traffic accident, it's a different story. So it was a cost savings kind of attempt to do that. And so both the ambulance company had essentially paid for the position, the city saved on that position, was reimbursed, and then also saved on the cost of having to roll one or more fire department vehicles.
They get it? Jim.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Manager, thank you for bringing up our comp study, as I've been talking about for a while, almost a long time. Concerns me that we spend thousands and thousands of dollars to train some of the highest quality, best trained police and fire people in the state of Arizona. And, you can't ask people raising families with mortgages trying to make a living to continually just be here for the love of Prescott. When they're in a free market system, which we're in a free market system, you can't put the golden handcuffs on them. And we've lost a lot of good personnel over the last few years, more specifically than not, because we're non-competitive in the marketplace at certain types of jobs. So that's got my attention too.
Charlie.
Mayor, thank you. And Allison, Mark, and Craig, thanks for the presentation. 2033 is not a picture of a community that I, for one, would want to live in, that has nothing except for you dial 911 and somebody's going to show up, but our population's grown and our staffing level hasn't, and we offer nothing else. Nothing. I tend to be, and those of us that coin ourselves conservatives and all those things, I am very adamantly against useless taxes. I voted every year against the property tax increase because it's a Band-Aid. It doesn't do anything to fix our structural issues. From the first slide that was shown to us, it's adamantly clear, it's amazingly clear that if we do nothing, if this council does nothing, within 2 years, the Prescott we know won't exist anymore. And within 10 years, the Prescott we thought we knew won't exist at all. I think we need to move forward swiftly with a thought-out plan that's clear and concise, that is easily explainable, that's put on one of these two election cycles, and the question be put out to the public. Now, we've seen some proposals that haven't done very well in the last few years, and I think it's easy for people to say, well, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And it's nebulous, and there's nothing that goes behind it. In this situation, I'm looking at some pretty definitive numbers, and I've looked at the PSPRS actuarials and the annual reports. Been talking about this for a couple years. There's no way in fiscal year 30 that we're going to have $4.5 million of new revenue just to cover this cost and maintain what the city is doing. So I think it's time for us to do something bold. It's time for us to do something visionary, and I think we need to come up with a comprehensive approach and take it to the voters and let them decide about the future of Prescott.
Anyone else?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Charlie, I agree with you. But we have a budget that's going to be coming up prior to an election. That we have to have a budget ready. What it looks like, I don't know at this point in time. And to gamble, it's a gamble whether the people will vote in any of all or none of the proposed tax increases. So we need to make the decisions prior to that.
And I agree 100% with you. As far as the fiscal year 16 budget goes, we have to plan with no changes, only understanding increasing costs, flat revenue. This is what it's going to take, because anything we do wouldn't even if the voters approved it, it might take effect in sometime during the calendar year of 16. So from my perspective to staff, you all have to bring forward the budget that gets us balanced with what we know today. And we need to go talk with the voters about what tomorrow is going to look like.
Well, and Councilman and Mayor, we've been doing quite a bit of thinking about the sequence to the point of Councilman Lozelle and Arnold about how do you sequence this, how do you come up with a 16 budget, what should it be. So we've got some additional discussion, but I would suggest not today on what that sequence should be, because frankly, we could be facing a situation where we have some fairly dramatic cuts in fiscal year 16, and then if it happens to pass, those people are gone. We've taken some key people, cut some functions and things like that. So we need to do some more thinking and bring to you something that you can understand in terms of alternatives, which might provide some transition. Although certainly, we are having to address this very conservatively, that we don't expect anything's going to necessarily pass. That would be foolish. What we have to assume is that we need to stay in business, or what we have to predicate this on is we're going to stay in business, and we're going to have to come with a balanced budget. But again, there could be some alternatives there about transitioning and so forth.
Mayor, I think when it comes to, I think government's got a bad habit of not addressing anything until it gets critical. Be it the lakes, be it the water in the ground, or this issue right here. And just to sum it up in layman's terms, we've been kicking this can down the road, and we are out of road. It has to be addressed.
Craig, on looking at time frames, in order to make the primary ballot, we'd have to have a total package together, including the language, by May 27th.
Well, you would actually have to adopt the ordinance. You would have to adopt an ordinance next week to make the primary. Adopt an ordinance next week, which would describe the purpose of the levy, basically for the duration of it and so forth.
So it's pretty obvious we'd be looking, if that is a decision that the council makes, we'd be looking at the November 3rd election. Now, with that, could there be an effective date of January 1st?
After the November election, it takes probably less than a month to complete the canvass and the count and make official the results of the election, and that would be a 30-day to put things in effect. Now the question is more of maybe a Mark Woodfield question, and obviously it's going to have to get, if you're increasing the TPT by a certain percentage, that all has to kind of get out there to all of the TPT payers, the retailers and all, and that's sort of I guess a practical question. Is, do you want to try and get that all implemented in that roughly 30-day period?
Yeah, well, even with an effective date in January, with the state doing the collection next year,
we're still collecting.
You're probably looking at 4 months down the road before there would be any financial impact at all that the city would see revenue.
Yeah, I think we definitely could do the legwork. The state will be collecting, but you should see, if it did go in effect January 1st, you should see the additional revenues in February.
Even with the state collection?
Yeah, they've guaranteed a minimal delay in those. So we'll see.
Good luck.
Yeah, and depending on what step we take here, I mean, we could put Prescott back on solid financial footing within 10 years from now.
Yeah, depending on which way you go, and obviously, if the tax passes, there would be relief, starting in next fiscal year, and then the tax could be gone within 10 years if you went with the higher one, and the problem solved, the structural issue that you guys have talked about would be resolved, you know, and that would be gone.
Because it's just a matter, this is just a matter of cash flow. That's all it changes.
Yeah, it's getting rid of this liability, getting it gone. And the savings is significant, obviously. The
And
80
with the
million.
hardest hit, you're talking a savings of $81 million.
Yes.
Now, I have a question, Mark. Regardless of, let's say the state fixes the system, this is still there.
Yes.
Okay.
It's there. It's definitely there in a comparable level.
Okay.
Exactly the same, hard to tell. It depends what the fix is, depends how extensive it is, if it's a vote in 16 or whatever, which has been kicked around. But there's still a liability owed that needs to be resolved.
Okay.
Charlie.
Mayor, just kind of bringing full circle the conversation and listening to the dates, I think it would be fair to direct staff to prepare a proposal. The one thing I think is key is that this doesn't happen in a vacuum, or, you know, it needs to have some sunlight on it as it goes through the process. But next week, I'd really like to discuss what that picture looks like. It needs to be succinct and clear of the purpose, the length of time, if we're able to pay it off early, what happens. Very clear as to how the money's to be used, i.e. pay this $77 million off. And it needs to be something that people can understand. I mean, you know, too often things are done where on one page it says we're going to change all the grass to AstroTurf, and over here it says we're going to put in all these new sprinklers. And I don't think in this situation we can afford for the questions to come up because we're not clear and clean enough in what we're talking about.
Okay, what you're asking for is a package only on this, on money for debt service and debt retirement, or you still have two other items that are on the table. One will be coming back on the 14th, a proposal for a 1 cent street tax.
Yep.
And a 0.25.
I think.
So where do you want to go with those, or do you want to get this out of the way before we approach that?
From my perspective, I think we need to have all of our options on the table on the 14th so that the 7 of us can make a decision in what direction to go forward to the public. I've heard 3 clear proposals. One is pay off this amazing amount of debt within the retirement system. One is to make sure we're able to fund our roads. And the discussion about open space continues to come up, and I think we need to make a decision about what that looks like from our perspective going forward. And so I would, from my perspective, say that next week we need to have whatever combination of options exists laid out for us to make some decisions on what the 7 of us are comfortable moving forward with, or at least the majority of us. I'm aware there's an initiative that's been at least started, which is for 1.25%. You know, I don't know if that becomes a reality, or if we need to look at all of the numbers, because we also can't hurt ourselves long term and price ourselves out of the market. You know, the economy is going to grow in certain areas and things are going to move, and we right now are the hub of some pretty major retail, and sales tax is always a big consideration. We can't shoot ourselves in the foot so it moves away from us. But if we don't fix this, then there's not going to be anybody spending money here in 33. So that's just my perspective. I'd like to see those options so we can pick numbers and move forward with a recommendation.
Yeah.
Steve, go ahead.
I'll make it short and sweet. I think anybody that sits up there as a steward of the taxpayers' money has got to separate wants and needs. And the number one, I think the wants have got to be on the ballot, or the needs have got to be on the ballot, and the wants need to stay off the ballot, not to confuse exactly what we need to have done in this community. And I will specifically talk about open space funding or maintenance. We have open space, we have trails, we've more than quadrupled what we had 20 years ago. As a matter of fact, 20 years ago, it was criminal to ask a contractor or a developer of land to give land for open space or trails. We do it every day, as a matter of fact. I believe we work in the private sector to achieve a want, but the needs need to be clarified by staff next week. Charlie, I agree with you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Does that pretty much complete item C
On the agenda?
on the agenda?
Anything
further that you want to?
Yeah, one point I think that we need to be clear on, and again, this is not decision day, but you know, if we're talking about the general election, or the November election, let's call it, that provides the opportunity for developing the materials and so forth. It would be difficult to impossible unless you want to have an all-night meeting next Tuesday, at which time we would have to have discussion of you know, what the mix or proposals are, the crafting of the ordinances, the ballot language basically, which is in the ordinance and so forth. That's nearly impossible.
I don't think your intent was to have a decision that would be votable. It was to have all the package that we could look at some options.
Exactly, and as part of that process, it gives the time for the public to understand what we're talking about as we're moving towards our direction, and it doesn't just happen like that. And that's not good.
And that's good. We can crystallize it with some specific alternatives. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, but don't expect a decision.
Yeah, we don't need an ordinance.
Well, I guess, just to be clear, that by not putting a particular ordinance on the ballot next week, your decision essentially is that you're going, if there's going to be a ballot item, it's going to be in the November election.
Yep.
So there is sort of a decision that you want to, that whatever ballot item or items that are going to go on to the on an election date, it'll be the November election, but there's still that issue of the 0.25 or the maintaining of the 1% for streets and roads. It was continued from last meeting to the next week. That could still be on the agenda, or it could be pulled and sort of thrown back into the mix for the broader discussion.
Well, I think his motion was to for an action on the agenda on the 14th, but we can do something with it at that point in time.
Right.
Okay. Is that fair?
That's fair, because we're going to have the budget workshop in the morning where we're talking about this, and we can get some direction about whether we would want to act on the streets situation or not at the voting meeting in the afternoon, but not make a formal decision for a few more meetings on exactly what to do with this issue.
Okay. Gene, you have anything further?
Yes, a few meetings ago, I think it was March 10th, Councilman Arnold stood at that podium and gave us a whole list of things that we should look at for increasing efficiencies, collecting monies that we haven't been collecting. What's happened to that? Is staff working on any of that, addressing any of it?
Yes, we have responses to some of those proposals. And for example, when we asked for departments to prepare contingency for up to 10% cuts, those departments who can charge fees asked if they could include new revenue to offset some of that cut, and the answer was yes. So we are addressing those items.
And I do have, I think, 10 more items, which I'll convey, and then I might just hit them in bullet point at the meeting on Tuesday.
Okay. Anything further on council? Okay, let's go to item D.
Thank you for sticking around.
And the next item is the legislative update, and it's also very exciting. Not really, but I'll just be very brief. The session did adjourn about 3:30 in the morning last Friday in a whirlwind of curiosity, where the Senate adjourned before the House was done with the work the Senate needed to do. So a couple of bills were left on the floor. This was the shortest session in about 40 years. They normally target about 100 days. They were in session for 81. Regardless of that short session, There were 1,163 bills posted, 345 bills passed, 224 have been signed, 6 vetoes, and the governor has until next Tuesday for that final legislation to either sign, veto, or allow the legislation to go into effect without his signature. I've given a lot of updates on the different legislative activity that we've been following. There's a handout that gives you what we currently know as the final status. Obviously, there's more time for vetoes, and we'll see what happens with that. There are a number of transaction privilege tax exemptions that were passed in bills, things like crop dusters being exempted from sales tax, utility pole attachments being exempted, just further erosion of the tax base in Arizona. There are some rumors that potentially some of those could be vetoed if they have significant revenue impact to the state, which does have a revenue problem. And then there was a change to the truth in taxation requirements for secondary districts. The county flood control district and the county free library district are secondary districts. So it doesn't put a cap on what the county can raise, but it requires them to follow some of the public notice requirements and voting requirements that the city has whenever we increase the property tax, although we have very little capacity to do so. Just 2 updates. The new law report from the League of Arizona Cities and Towns should be out within the month. And so I'm happy to come back and just kind of touch on a few things when we have more time. And then with that, the revised league process for policy committees, which used to be the league resolution process, is going to be starting. They're asking for ideas, just sort of a broader range of ideas for the policy committees to start looking at no later than May 14th. So I would suggest if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll be bringing forward something, I would assume, related to the sober living homes.
Okay. Steve, go ahead.
Suggestions, you bet. Every representative in the state of Arizona sits in a community that's got a budget issue based upon PSPRS. It is time for somebody down there, along with the League of Cities, to stand lockstep to rewrite and repurpose the whole position of the Public Safety Retirement Fund, or watch all these communities end up like we are now. I have no idea what they're afraid of, Allison, but we need, as a contingent in the city of Prescott, Chino's facing it right now. We're facing it. Prescott Valley is going to be behind us before long. Everybody's got the same issue, and somebody needs to wake up and quit worrying about their election day and who they support and who they do not.
Mayor?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful if we could hear from Brian Jeffers, who is with the Phoenix Firefighters Union, because he's been working diligently on trying to address this PSPRS problem, because it's for the benefit of public safety personnel now and in the future. They are extremely interested in finding solutions, and he's been written up in the New York Times. I think I gave you all an article last year about the work he's been doing. I'd like to invite him to come up and talk to the council and tell us the kinds of steps that they see would be helpful.
Anything further?
Allison, I just noticed the solid waste collection on multifamily passed. And
It did pass.
Signed by the governor.
It was signed by the governor. It has a delayed effective date of July 1, 2016, and it does require that a private hauler that would take over multifamily collection of 4 or more units would have to give the city 60 days notice before they took on that account. But it will be problematic as we move forward with being able to appropriately staff and manage our our fleet of vehicles and our rate for solid waste collection.
I recalled it was somewhere around $150,000, $160,000 revenue hit.
Assuming that 20% of the current commercial, multifamily housing accounts that would become commercial would go away. It's over $500,000 if they all were to go, which is an unlikely proposition.
Super.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everyone. We are adjourned.